And today's contender for the literal invincible character that is immune to death, Seliph himself. Let's see who we shall match up against. It is... Death itself. Heck no. Hey guys, Akariss here, bringing you a brand new recording environment. No, actually, obviously a mythic unit analysis in Fire Emblem Heroes. But seriously, I am in a slightly different location, and this should be a more permanent area. You'll notice that there is a bookshelf here that is kind of empty. I promise that will fill up in time. So, with that being said, let's get into today's Mythic Hero analysis. Today's video will feature, as you can see on the blackboard on the top left, we're going to take a look at Hel's stats and skills, a couple of unit builds, and some allies that actually complement her pretty well. And of course, I will rank all the mythics as I have done with previous legendary and mythic heroes. So, with that being said, let's take a look at the stats first. Hel is... This is speculation, by the way. It isn't confirmed, but it should be pretty accurate based on some data that fellow smart people have accumulated. The link for that is in the description below. So if this stat spread is to be true, the closest comparison I can have to this is probably like a Camilla, but instead of it being Camilla with balanced, Hel is lacking in res, and this totally makes sense once we get into the weapon that she has. So she's like a fast, pretty bulky-ish unit. You'll see why in a moment, but she does have a pretty unique dynamic to her, avoiding death and all that. The skills she comes with are Distant Counter, Guard Bearing, and her unique preference skill, Inevitable Death. So let's talk about this weapon first. Hel's Reaper is a slaying axe with a bunch of extra stuff on it. She is a dark mythic hero that adds defense, and this is a good counterbalance to Mila, who adds defense and wants to check defense with her skill. So Hel will be a good unit to use to counterbalance any Mila if she's giving you trouble on your defense team. That doesn't necessarily mean that she's worth it, and I will talk about that obviously in more detail, but essentially her weapon makes it so she has IO shield built in, a very nice thing for a green axe fire, of course. She has slaying effect to reduce the cooldown of her special, and here's where things get a little bit complicated. She pretty much cannot die in one round. She can avoid death once when fighting against anything that isn't a tome or staff unit. This means, like, if she gets hit for 41 damage by, let's say, a sword unit, she will survive that first hit. If she gets doubled in the same round of combat, she then dies. But if that unit doesn't double, then they have to go in through another combat, or another unit has to go into combat to finish off Hel. So pretty much she's technically immune to death to anything that isn't a tome and a staff, and that's pretty important. Now, an additional point to also consider is when she engages with units that aren't tomes or staff, she looks at the enemy's res stat. This is not always an advantage. It doesn't calculate the lower of defense and res. It actually always calculates res. So right away you might think like, oh no, that's terrible. But realistically, Air herself has high res, low defense, and is not a tome or staff unit, so she actually fights against Hel pretty well and should outspeed her generally speaking. So if you have like a bolt tower or a bit of chip damage, Air can just kill Hel in one round, and Hel won't retaliate and kill her back because she's checking res as opposed to defense. So this can actually be kind of a detriment to her. But realistically, she's a pretty unique character, and her advantages mostly overcome the disadvantages. Tomes and staff, obviously her big weakness. Staffs can be counteracted, but like a red tome is almost always going to decimate Hel. There is some things, again, we'll look at in this video, of course, to see why she can or can't work. And here is, of course, her preference skill. Pretty basic. I mean, just reduce your enemy stats by 4 in combat within 2 spaces. Now, this does help her allies, so she actually ends up being a pretty nice frontliner if someone was to engage pretty close to her, and then let's say a range unit came in or another melee unit came in and took them out. Fireball is definitely worth a mention here, and of course I will cover that as well. So her base kit is okay actually for a base kit, but there are definitely some changes you can make. The notable comparison is like Seliph, of course, because he's been immune to death, but he actually needs over 50% health, and you know, that isn't always easy to maintain, especially when bolt towers are considered. Okay, so the first sample build I want to show off today is actually this. Now, it may not look that impressive on a first glance, but it actually covers her weaknesses pretty well. And that is the combination of guard bearing and deflect magic, and actually having to remove distant counter. By removing distant counter, any magic user that doubles her will do significantly less damage, and the first hit also gets its damage reduced because of guard bearing. This makes her a very good frontliner unit. Some skills here can obviously be interchanged, like HP defense, HP res on the A skill, for instance, if you're going to be more budget, distant defense 4, or even a stance 3 skill, mixed stance, all work pretty well. The C skill can be like ground orders if she is to be thrown onto, like, let's say a mixed team or an infantry pulse team. So, but the important thing to realize here is the combination of guard bearing and deflect magic makes even tome users struggle a little bit to get kills on her, because they just can't push through all the damage or bulk she has. Like her C skill, guard bearing, deflect magic, makes it pretty much so like only red tome units can punch through, and they might not even punch through considering how powerful guard bearing deflect magic can be once you add in merges and support behind her, maybe through like a bunch of ward flyers, which a fireball definitely can do. So if you're running like fireball, this is actually pretty good. Stances could also work as well. The reason the fort defense res is there is obviously because of AoE specials, where visible res ends up being pretty good. With that being said, removing distant counter and keeping Ignis so that she has like a powerful nuke is also pretty good. Moving on, this is, I would consider, probably pretty staple if you just had Mystic Boost lying around, maybe through Bridal Micaiah or an Air because you don't need one. The seal is also interchangeable, and so is the C skill as always, but essentially what this build does is checkmate your opponent if they don't have an actual counter to Hel, and this is a real thing. Due to her high speed, if a physical unit and the enemy doesn't have a tome unit, some comps actually don't have tomes. For example, Peony is technically there as a tome, but if you were to actually build Hel properly or have the right support, Peony might not even do a single point of damage. There is a 20 res on Hel and a plus res IV, obviously with some support behind her, some flowers, or possibly just a seal that gives her extra res like fort res or distant defense can also basically make it so someone like Peony can't get the kill. What this does is hard counter and checkmate your opponent if they don't have something that kills Hel. And they would need, so speed and res are the key stats to look for here in this Hel build. Every single combat, as long as there's no double involved, she will heal because of Mystic Boost, and therefore that she becomes unkillable because she's over 1 HP. So this is very, very annoying, and if she charges Ignis, can definitely just win you some games. It's not the most common scenario, and I don't really consider it like broken or overpowered, but it's definitely something that you're gonna, as an offense players are gonna have to consider this as a thing. Finally, I want to show off some partners that I think really scale pretty well due to Hel's existence. And the first one is going to be regular Olivia. If she was to get a Resplendent skill, this would make her amazing. So, Olivia now is fully capable, this is with 2 Hels, but a single Hel can still pretty much cover even Mila. This is now a dancer that is immune to both Mila and most basic Bridal Fjorms, which means she does not get isolated and does her job as she needs to do. HP defense can also work in the A skill, but fort defense there, again, is a super good skill, and it lowers attack for dancers so they don't get baited out. So now that we have this as an option, and it's actually one of the better ones, this is super strong and definitely worth considering on your defense team, especially for infantry pulse teams, and Hel pretty much providing ground orders and the defense buff which was needed to counter Mila. And thankfully that came pretty soon. Second, if you are considering a fireball, and this has to be a far more premium option, folks, is plus 10 Flyer Olivia. Plus 10 Flyer Olivia, again, has a very good stat spread for avoiding both Bridal Fjorm and Mila, of course. So this is going to be your dancer of choice, and they're again interchangeable skills here depending on positioning, but essentially these combinations will definitely stand out as partners to Hel. And she could honestly just work with anything else, like when you consider, but these are going to be the strongest dancers to work with Hel on defense. With that being said, that's all I'm going to really cover for now. You can feel free to let me know what you have in mind in the comments below. But I am going to take a look now at what I consider to be the Dark Mythics in order. Special guests. Apparently we got the Earth Legendaries. No, okay, that's gone. So when looking at the Earth Legendaries, sorry, the Dark Legendaries, I actually consider this something like in this order. So even though I haven't shown it, Yoon and Hel are probably tied for about second, but Brammy is definitely the best and Sothis is last. Depending on the team composition you run, Hel can be a little bit better than Yoon, but Yoon can definitely be better than Hel depending on what team comps you run. For example, I feel like a Flyerball with a Hel frontliner is gonna want Hel over Yoon, and an Infantry Pulse team may actually prefer Yoon as opposed to Hel because of backline range threat. If you don't already have like a good green nuke, Yoon can kind of do that pretty well with sturdy impact from what I've seen. But regardless of all this being said, Brammy is hands down still the best and most threatening unit on Dark Defense. He single-handedly almost shuts down most tanks. If a tank doesn't run no follow-up, you pretty much die to Brammy because of all the extra stats, free follow-ups, and the fact that his preference skill shuts down the allies that it's like a one-on-one me bro when it comes to Brammy. So Brammy does stand out as the best. He also gives attack, which is super strong when you consider nuke teams and infantry pulse, especially because there are a bunch of nukes in most cases. So unfortunately, Sothis, dragons aren't that great, especially on defense, and it's kind of like the Lift problem. Like a melee red is not that threatening on defense. It doesn't really do much. Even Lift is probably a bit better than Sothis, but they're not on the same season to make that comparison. If you're looking for the value, consider Brammy and Mila next month's banner, and maybe not really go here unless you need Edelgard or Thrasir, because Thrasir is still good and Edelgard is definitely a good fire legendary. I hope that you took something out of this, and as always, comments below what you think. Maybe you're same for CYL or next units, and of course, sub to the channel if you haven't already, give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Much love, peace.